ask your question later on in the chat. I would like to say that we have a mixed audience here today. I see that already 41 people have logged in and more are coming. It is a mixed audience of companies that already have some experience in working with international financial institutions. But we also have some newcomers who are attracted by the new possibilities that the global fight against Corona may offer to them. So generally speaking, trying to get a contract with the World Bank and other multilateral development banks, I will say MDB further on. This is the only acronym that I will use. MDB is for multilateral development banks. So for companies to try to get a contract, it means a heavy burden on a company in terms of money and time, especially for beginners. And in this respect, the Corona crisis may offer new changes, as there are new fast-track projects put in place now by the World Bank to fight the pandemic. The World Bank offers very short-term possibilities now too. So, and moreover, this kind of procurement is more centralized than before. It is centralized to a certain extent, which makes it transparent, efficient, and also fast. At FIT, we have invited Corona companies too, so we are trying to make a list of people who offer special technology in relation with the Corona crisis, with the COVID-19. We try to list them up, and some of them were contacted because they let us know, and by us I mean the head office of FIT, or the offices abroad. They let know that they have this kind of special opportunities. At the same time, I must say, so now I've been speaking about the new fast track project, but at the same time, the long-term projects continue to offer possibilities, of course, for companies who have been doing business with the World Bank before. Well, there will be a project as before, albeit that those projects will be adapted as infrastructure in the future will have to be made Corona-proof. So AWEX, Hub Brussels and FIT have always taken a long-term approach with their companies, so in support of the companies, given the lengthy preparation and implementation times of projects, and given the amount of time it takes to adapt to the procurement logic of MDB finance standards. This means that we take the interested companies through a long process of introductory and deeper digging workshops, sessions on where to find the needed information on projects and tenders, even business delegations to Washington, as well as to the developing countries where the projects are implemented. So this is all makes all part of a longer track of our support to companies. However, those companies who supply medical products and appliances, testing systems, tracing systems, innovative social distancing technologies have an opportunity now to work in a faster way with the multilateral development banks, as the needs are urgent and the procurement methodology in some cases adapts to that. So we hope as export promoting organizations, AWEX, Hub Brussels and FIT, we hope that this will lead to a new group of companies that will respond to MDB tenders, especially in the health sector, of course. So, but I have spoken enough, I think. So let me present our speaker of today, Mr. Spiros Voyadzis, who is the CEO of PFD, a private company specialized in supporting companies to do business with the MDB, either through business organizations such as AWEX, Hub Brussels and FIT, either on an individual basis. So Spiros has the advantage of having an office very close to the headquarters of the World Bank in Washington, and he's also a former employee of the bank. So I now give the floor to him. Spiros?
Thank you very much, Johan. It's a real pleasure to be with you, and there are several friends that already met several times, and actually following up today the discussion. I would like first of all to start by thanking you, Johan, and also Simes for AWEX, and Olivier Costa for Brussels Hub, for really taking the initiative and organizing this discussion. So I would suggest that it be really a discussion if we can organize that. We've done it in other cases. As Johan said, just raise your hand electronically, and then you could come in. Please interrupt as we go along, because then I will provide more information and really reactions. Of course, I'm here in Washington, D.C. I would say stranded in Washington, D.C. You know, I'm also Belgian national and U.S. national. Since February, actually, I haven't traveled at all. With many of you, and as you know, certainly because we have a partner office in Brussels, I'm in Brussels every month. So for me, this has been a major change in my life, really, COVID. In the last 6-7 months, I used to travel every 3 weeks, actually, over the Atlantic, going to see our clients and also the developing countries where we had particular projects under implementation. So it has been a big change. A change also, as you know, in the US, COVID-19 is not yet under control. So we have the COVID issue. We also have the political issue, because our elections are very important in a couple of months now, on November 3. And the third factor is that we have an extraordinary president who is really driving us all crazy for the last several months. And I think we're getting into a difficult period now for the next 2 months before the election. So having said that as an introduction, what I would like to suggest is just to tell you very quickly what we do, and then move to the main agenda of the exchange this morning. I will take in total about 25 to 30 minutes. Then we can have questions and answers, and hopefully also, if you feel, please interrupt me during the discussion so that I can answer any concerns that you may have. We will proceed on that basis. This is what I wanted to suggest to you, to have some general observations on overall the development assistance climate right now. Then give you a spot image of the World Bank, but also talk about a few other multilateral development banks. But just before COVID-19, so you can see basically the priorities and the different sectors that the World Bank is actively involved. Then on point 3, get into the COVID response from the World Bank, the approach, the sectors, and what are the main changes compared to a period as it was, say, the normal activities of those institutions. Then talk about the specific changes in procurement that were introduced for COVID-19, and talk about 2 or 3 things there that we lived through, and then see how and what are the effects of all that for private sector companies like you, like us. And actually, we lived it through in the last 6 months. We have been uniquely placed to work with our clients in response to COVID, certainly as we do work with a very large company in the health sector. So we've been very much involved in this area, and all the lessons learned through that process. Without getting into confidential matters, of course, I will try to share with you to see what do the private sector companies need to do to respond to the new situation. And by the way, this new situation may last for another year or 2. So and it may become part of life actually for the next following years, as many things are going well in spite of COVID-19. So let me begin with the general observations. There is a concern that I have regarding bilateral assistance. This is both from the United States and from the European Union, for a simple reason, is that the COVID-19, of course, has huge effects on the economies of all countries, not only developing countries, but industrialized countries as well. And you can imagine that this development assistance, bilateral development assistance, may get hit to some extent. It's going to be the wrong time to do it, but understandably that one may see that. This is to the point, and you can see also, I think, the balance of multilateral development banks, and certainly the World Bank will come to as being a very active actor in the last 6-7 months, and it's not only the World Bank, it's several other multilateral banks and also Millennium Challenge Corporation. But you can also see on the European Union side, what I see is that the European Commission may start working with the multilateral development banks as a co-financier, because they're moving much faster in this during this period. So we may well see in the next several months that components are co-financed, but perhaps in parallel financing, but most probably on joint financing with the multilateral development banks in certain developing countries. For the United States, here, USAID, which is a bilateral agency, is trying to reallocate funds, and it's also requesting some additional support. Of course, one shouldn't forget that when Mr. Trump came to power 3.5 years ago, among the things he did was to reduce the budgets of the bilateral agencies in the United States. So USAID is already managing the funds that it reduced funds since the last 3 to 4 years. But it has been a 6 trillion so far money that has been printed in the United States to deal with the economic situation that the country is facing, and of course unemployment, which is unprecedented of what in what has happened in the last few months. And the discussions are continuing for another perhaps $1 or $2 trillion to come for additional support. So where would development assistance stand? You can see the pressures on all that at a time when developing countries really need support. So we also see on the European Commission that technical assistance, which is needed in the consulting business to support investments in developing countries, are to some extent stalling, nothing to do with the European Commission, but having to do with the difficulty to have those missions go in the field. In many cases, they were asked to leave actually and go back to the national countries where people came from. On the other hand, you see those multilateral development banks, particularly the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the IDB, very much active. And this is where I was telling Johan earlier today, I can see, and I've been seeing that now for a year, but even more now, I think, where we can see bilateral assistance because of the pressures in national budgets being reduced, but we can see the multilateral development banks coming up much stronger and providing more funding to developing countries. For a simple reason is that the interest rates are so low, so these banks can borrow funds and provide loans to developing countries. And I think we will see this movement taking place more and more in this economic situation due to COVID. So the impact, if you look at that, we're talking about $4.35 trillion of impact in the economy of the world, which basically, if you calculate and you take it, it's like wiping out from the economic front Germany and Belgium at the same time. So we do face some challenges in the next year or so, if not more, for that. So let me give you the image, as I said, as the second part of this discussion on the World Bank. Just to give you the sectors and the priorities, and there is no need to take any notes. As Johan said, you may have access to this presentation later on. So overall for the bank, this is pre-COVID, before COVID. So basically what was planned to the end of last year. The reason why we don't have the numbers for this year, which will include COVID, is that the next report will be coming out in October, in a month's time, just in time for the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF. And I mean, myself, I don't know how these meetings will be conducted, probably remotely, but we will see what type of activities and gatherings will take place. So with these numbers, the World Bank committed 65 billion. Of that, direct for programs and projects, 45 billion. And you can see that, as it was for previous years, most of the activity goes to Africa, and interestingly, followed by South Asia and the Middle East and North Africa, which increased its share. Energy and extractives, and this is mostly energy, is really the number 2 of IBRD and IDA lending. So it's a very big share. And you can also see water, sanitation, and waste management also being an important part of the activities of the World Bank. Transportation, even if slightly reduced, it's still very significant and will continue to be even more actually in the new numbers that will come up in October, showing what has happened until June 30, 2020, basically on transportation. So these are the main sectors. And in this table, when you look at it, you can see by sector the changes. You need to add, of course, the IBRD column with the IDA column for the same fiscal year, and you will see the changes that I've just been discussing. That will give you an indication for the areas where you work and you are a specialist, what the market is. Talking about the other organizations, though, and the market as a whole, and I think Johan and Arnaud and Hubert and Olivier know this number by heart by now. The commitments on a yearly basis before COVID are between 1.8 and $2 billion per week from all those 7 or 8 multilateral development banks. So we're talking about a huge market. About 50% of that goes to infrastructure overall. By that meaning roads, water, energy, etc. As part of the activity. So the market is a huge market, and it has its constraints in terms of trying to get into this market and try to win contracts. You will see from here, when you look at it more closely, this is the distribution by region of IBRD and IDA combined, and this is what I mentioned, 33% for Africa. The other region is South Asia, and then followed by Latin America and the Caribbean, and then Middle East and North Africa. If you look at the IBRD by region, the IBRD, as you know, the difference between IBRD and IDA, IBRD is the bank that lends money to countries that have a GNI per capita over $1,200, $1,300 per year. And IDA is that pocket that is providing grants at very low interest rates, not even 1%, for countries that have a GNI per capita below this number of $1,200 or $1,300. So you can see the IBRD distribution in this table. And you can see the IDA distribution, where most of this money that is very low interest rates and very long repayment periods goes to Africa. 65% goes to Africa on a yearly basis, actually, for that. These are the sectors, and as of you're working in different sectors, I'm not going to insist on one or the other, but you can certainly see from that table where the money goes. Interestingly, to me, this year, or these numbers, show a dramatic increase on public administration by over 10%, actually. So it moved from 9 to 19% from one year to the other. But the others are more or less constant as a percentage from one year to the other, with minor exceptions. Now, what happened since COVID? And I think this is really the part that has been very interesting, I think, on our side, and very challenging. As I said, for us, has been also very interesting, as we have been involved, and not only on the health, as I mentioned before, but in other areas. And what for me was surprising, and I'm sure our colleagues that work in development assistance in the Ministry of Finance, or in Foreign Affairs, or certainly in FITA, WEX, and Hub Brussels, work hasn't stopped. There was a hiatus of, I would say, a few weeks, if not a month, sometime in March, where things had to be regrouped, where people started working from home. I think has been the same thing for all of us. We are actually continuing to work from home. I'm the only one going to our office here in Washington. Nobody else really wants to come, and I certainly don't want to pressure for this to happen. But the same applies to the World Bank, the IDB. The same applies to the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Most of the people are still working from home. Some attempts to bring people back are taking place actually in this month, in September. So we will see more of the people, officials working in these organizations to come back. But having said that, and I make that point, it's impressive to see how all these organizations continued with the regular programs, apart a month or 6 weeks of shaking up that needed to be done. But more importantly, they came up with new programs and projects under COVID. And on that, I must say, and not because the World Bank is an institution that I worked for several years, but it has been an extraordinary achievement, in the sense that they came with so many new projects, and also restructuring of projects in the health sector to go forward with this pandemic. So this is one part which I think is impressive, really, for the World Bank, if you compare with other institutions. But I must say, we also won projects funded by the Asian Development Bank. We're waiting results from the African Development Bank. So we worked with the other banks, and they have also been very active in this climate. On top of that, for the next 15 months or so, the World Bank has officially announced that we'll deploy over $160 billion in developing countries for a variety of sectors, which will include infrastructure, but also budget support to basically deal with the consequences of COVID-19, and of course bolster the private sector development and creation of employment. These would be the overall priorities for the World Bank. And it's more or less the same, actually, for the other banks that I mentioned before. In the case of health, and this for me was unprecedented, really, to see it. In the case of the World Bank, in just 4 to 6 weeks, they designed, prepared, and approved by the board, or delegated to the vice presidents of the different regions, over 100 projects and loans to 104 countries, actually, at that time. So it was an extraordinary achievement. It was a little bit of a kind of a cookie cutter approach, as we say, in the sense that the approach taken on the different supplies and procurement of equipment in the health areas, some technical assistance support. But this first line of command was more or less the same for all countries, with the same approach, the same presentation that took place. But they were able to move this funding with projects that were ranging really from 8 to 10 million to 500 million within the same formats. So this movement was really all done in about 6 weeks or 8 weeks of work by the World Bank. For me, this was unprecedented, really, to trying to move very fast. The other thing that was also to me, after all these years, either working for the World Bank or for the last 20 years in the private sector with my company and clients, is the procurement flexibility that the World Bank introduced. And we will talk about that later. We have a separate area in this discussion of this morning. Then also, and beyond health, really, and I think this is important, the World Bank is still working right now on the restructuring of more than 100 operations in the transport sector to make sure that the remaining contracts are adapted to the current situation. We can discuss that situation later on, but it has changed a lot, actually, in the way all these things are implemented. And the numbers that are coming out for not pre-COVID, but including 6 months of COVID, or 4 months of COVID, which will end last June 30th, there are numbers coming out that show that new commitments of up to 8 billion in the transport sector have been approved and will be implemented. So you see this impact that will be coming, and you will see also, of course, a lot of activity in the other sectors. There is that discussion, which I haven't been able really to confirm, but some kind of a shaving of 10 to 15% of existing operations that have not been moving very quickly, and then to reallocate those funds to budget support operations or to other means to make sure that money goes to the developing countries at a time when they need it most. Similar approaches are taken by the other banks, like the Asian Development Bank, like the African Development Bank, and certainly also the IDB in that area. But I think in terms of health projects, the World Bank has been a very large lender in the area of health, but this time after COVID has been even a greater effort from this institution. So what we will see, and this is not yet done, there will be coming out several projects to support social protection measures, refugees, cash transfers, to improve the livelihoods of people, and then get into the productive sectors by supporting trade with special financing for small enterprises. And of course, the debt moratorium agreed by the IMF and the World Bank, and also the bilateral agencies, bilateral countries will, of course, help a lot with non-repayments of debts back to the creditors that has already been agreed upon. So we will see investments in agriculture, in water, energy, roads, capacity building. I think what was surprising to me is that most of the activities, actually, as I mentioned before, continued. In addition came the COVID-19 health, but as well as changes in the water sector for COVID-19 and several other sectors because of COVID-19. And one sees components of COVID-19 or due to COVID-19 in practically those sectors and those loans that are coming for approval. So for me, to underline this, we will continue to see a lot of activity by the multilateral development banks coming over the next year, if not 2 years. And interestingly, the first, I think in March, as I said, there was a little bit of a sitting back and thinking, what can we do? As you know, this business of ours, it's always trips to come and visit the World Bank or the African Development Bank or the Asian Development Bank. And we do that and we know that and we do that with our clients on a yearly basis. But it's also visits to the countries. And this is where the decisions on the contracts are made, as you know. But all these things now cannot take place. We cannot come to Washington, D.C., unfortunately. We cannot go to, we cannot travel right now to either Europe or to developing countries. So how do you do it? So we were able, actually, our company came up with a few ideas on virtual missions, which we are performing. And we are doing this. Then it was picked up by several others, picked up by the World Bank also. We're doing this by basically visiting countries to see progress of existing implementation of projects through third parties. And if interested, I would explain to you more about that. So we were able to remain in the business. I'm touching wood saying that so far, and hoping that we will continue to remain that business. It's not easier than before. It's more complicated than before, but I think we have found ways to change our way of business to be able to respond to the situation the way it is now. We can discuss all that, of course, at the time of the later on, or if you have any comments, please do, as we said from the very beginning, during this process, just by raising your hand, and the coordinator will give you the floor. Now, we're getting into an important part, which is really the changes, and again, I'm coming back with this underline of flexibility that the World Bank has shown, and why this was needed. And the first reason for that was that, as you can imagine, regarding the health sector, the market was extremely volatile. I mean, basically for respirators, Nairobi was competing with New York City. It was as simple as that. I will give you a specific example that happened with us actually, and a client this was, we identified 10 million masks from a supplier. The only condition was that they had to stay in Europe, and they had to be delivered. They could be delivered to several countries, of course, borrowing countries of the World Bank, but there are many in Eastern Europe still, even if they're members of the European Union. We connected with different stakeholders. We connected with the World Bank, connected with the countries. Within 3.5 hours, I repeat, 3.5 hours, the 10 million masks were gone. Someone else said, I don't know really which country, or someone else, or whoever that is, from Europe actually, bought them in 3.5 hours. They were absolutely gone at a price which was unbelievable. So you can imagine the difficulties and the volatility of the market with all the needs of the same equipment, because it was for the protective equipment that was necessary to get it, or there was for generation of oxygen, or it was for the generators and the respirators that were absolutely needed in every single country. So everybody was competing for the same production, really, for that. So yes, manufacturers were increasing their production, but the demand was really far greater, and therefore something had to be done to ensure that developing countries could at least get their share. So what the bank came with this proposal, which is used under emergency situations, but particularly in this case, they formed a very small committee within the procurement department of the World Bank. There's great guys working there, really. And what the World Bank did was to basically contact the countries, combine together the need for whatever equipment was necessary. And then the World Bank, with the approval of the countries, after confirmation that they needed that equipment and all that, and the bank was ready to get this information. There was also an external company, organization rather, that worked with the World Bank on to define the specifications of the equipment that was needed, specifications for respirators, specifications for masks, etc., etc. So the bank had an outside view, an expert outsider basically saying what the specifications should be. The bank was contacting the different countries to get the authorization under the bank loans to proceed with the purchase. The bank would group several needs and several purchases, and then go and contact the suppliers, reach agreement, within a few hours, get the okay from the Ministry of Finance of the different countries, and actually advance 40% of the payment to the contractor. That facilitated, because then the bank was competing with New York City or any other organizations, perhaps even with more, but they were able to do it because of the amount of funding that was coming out. And of course, the process was saved in terms of knowing what the specification should be and knowing that the price was the correct price to pay. Once the equipment and supplies were delivered to the country and they were checked by the country that it was as was purchased, then the bank would pay the remaining 60%, and then the bank would take the 100% repayment from its own loan immediately. So that, of course, helped tremendously as a way of dealing. And as this point you can see, the bank reached to over 3,000 suppliers to make sure that procurement will actually take place. The other thing that happened through this procurement was to authorize UN agencies locally to also use the proceeds of the World Bank and do the procurement for the countries. Now, this was in principle, I think it's a very good idea in the sense that then the World Bank cannot get involved into the specifics of the procurement, has to remain one step back to make sure that the procurement takes place correctly, no corruption, etc., and with certain priorities of procurement for the World Bank. And the UN agencies are there, they're local, they can actually support the governments. What is happening is that the UN agencies, when they manage funds from the World Bank, take a certain percentage, take a management fee, which of course makes that those agencies that are cash stripped really would like to do that, and they were doing it. But it became a kind, and this is one of the lessons actually for us, it became whatever went through these UN agencies, we could not access in terms of information, in terms of what were the tenders that were coming out. Nothing was really coming out into the regular systems where the information is displayed. So I will come back to that as being one of the really issues that and lessons learned through the process. What are the effects now of all the above for private sector, and is there increased corruption? Let me highlight that in two areas really. One is the way we were working before COVID and the way we are working with COVID. And when I say we, it's not only my company, but the clients with whom we're working and we are supporting to win contracts. Again, not only the World Bank, Millennium Challenge Corporation or African Development Bank, IDB, and the Asian Development Bank and others, European Investment Bank, etc., which is done normally through the Brussels office. So the way we were doing it is with this 1.82 billion per week of commitments to select very carefully the business opportunities. And we had 3 or 4 very important selection criteria, excuse me, which would basically help us to identify and select those projects where we had the maximum chances to win. There is a cost, as you know very well, with each opportunity, and we can discuss that cost also when we are preparing them and submitting them. Then on the project cycle, and we always discuss that when we have these presentations with companies from FIT or WEX or Hub Brussels, it's like a clock, really. And it starts on 12, it starts with identification, and then at 30 minutes after the hour is the board presentation, and then the information for the contract awards comes between, say, 7 and 11, really. We work between 12 and 4. This is the area where we really try to work up front and to be very early in this, not only getting information, but also talking about the company's forte and the way we would proceed, and also giving advice actually to those institutions. So we select 7 operations that are having the bigger chances to win. We are pre-selected 3 times after 20 years of experience at about 34-35% of success rate, and we win 1 contract. So we work then on our side with the Multilateral Development Bank, preparing the ground, doing whatever lobbying is necessary, and trying to get the maximum information, but also advising the different team leaders on the design, as our clients are experts. And the client basically work in the country. Now, this is before COVID. And working in the country means working with the ministry that will make the decisions on contract awards, is working with the project implementation unit, is working with the representation of the Multilateral Development Bank locally, is finding local partners, is trying to understand the local scene. All this extremely important for the preparation of a good tender. This was done by the client, our clients, with our support. Many times we go on these visits to countries with our clients. This, of course, now doesn't work because we cannot visit, at least for now. Now, this is where the virtual visits and virtual missions come on stream for that, and this is something that we have practiced. Now, what happens after COVID in the last 6 months? And I would like to share with you what we lived through. I'm sure some of you must have lived the same, or all of you. You have tried to get to understand what was happening in the different countries, the projects that were funded by those institutions and coming out on stream to get out with what is needed to be done to win the contracts. So let me highlight a few on the I would say reactions and also lessons learned. First, the procurement is going very fast. So there is no way to have this clock, as I mentioned, 12 to 11, and then we're working between 12 and 4, and we are actually bidding between 7 and 9 on that. It is between 12 and 2, the procurement is out. In the case certainly of, I would say, not on the normal programs, I'm talking about specifically the emergency programs. And then it's a cookie cutter procurement in terms of components. So you see in all these projects, equipment and supplies, then you see the technical support, if it's included in that project. You see the IT needs, etc. But it's always the same components. And we looked at, I would say, probably 100 different short appraisal reports. By the way, I never should have mentioned that. Never seen an appraisal report of the World Bank of 12 or 15 pages. This is what these projects were. It was the only way, of course, to move very fast, but which means that may change actually the way that the World Bank is working, which is more likely the European Investment Bank, actually, shorter reports and faster approvals. So it was more or less the same components overall. So we couldn't really, and it was there were texts saying what was included in component one in general terms. That left the flexibility actually to the country to say, well, I need protective equipment, I need masks, I need whatever necessary, I need oxygen or I need respirators, and then with the help of the bank or without the help of the bank, go out and try to get them. What we also saw there is that several bilateral cooperation agencies became involved. So you would see, I'm just picking up an example, in a country you would see that particular project from the World Bank, 25 or 30 million emergency for the health sector, and then all of a sudden there would be an announcement by whatever agency of whatever country of Europe or the United States that would say, well, we're giving a grant for also equipment under this umbrella. And of course, you would see some national companies of that particular development agency running more quickly than we could do to get involved. The serious concern we had, because all these things were happening, and as I said, over 100 projects were prepared and approved in a period of about 6 weeks or 2 months maximum, and still will be coming out actually in the next several months. The serious concern was that we had difficulty finding really the tenders that were coming out, procurement information. We could get some of that and therefore tried to obtain additional information. And those that were coming up, of course, we followed up and submitted. And as I said, we won several. But this was a minority part of the activity, really. We had difficulty finding the information, not only from the funding organization, but also from the country. We had trouble getting in contact with the PIUs, project implementation units. We had trouble getting in our usual channels. We had really difficulty getting information, and including from UN agencies. This is why I'm coming back to the previous point that I mentioned, was that this continues to be for me a kind of a gray area. What has been the role of the UN agencies? I'm sure they must have been helpful. But what happens with the private sector like us, that we want to provide services or work and sell equipment or be involved in one way or the other? I mentioned before COVID that we were working on both sides of the equation. So working with the funding organization, and this is mostly, we would take the leadership for that as a company, PFD, and then working also in the country, and on that, the client would take the lead with us supporting the client. After COVID, predominance was in the local scene. In other terms, once this funding was made available, it was the PIUs and the ministries of health and the ministries of finance that were juggling all these things in terms of procurement to move. Now, when the bank was involved, and these were the large procurements of equipment and or protective equipment, situation was different, because they had several suppliers, they knew where to go, and then there was a guarantee of the World Bank in terms of the process being correct. And as I said, this additional entity that was providing all the specifications for all this equipment, which were worldwide accepted specifications. So there was this guarantee of equity and correctness. I don't know what happened on the other side. And my hunch is that there has been a lot of one-to-one procurement really taking place because of the emergency, and as there was need to move forward. So direct contracting, I think, has been of priority during that period, which I'm sure eliminated several of the companies that were interested to participate. So as a result of that, and as a result of the change of the scene to much more local than the funding organization, we came to the conclusion, I can give you some numbers. We looked at 100 projects, for example, in the health sector. I think we contacted probably 40 or 50 TTLs, team leaders in the banks and project implementation units in the country. We got responses that of interest by about 10, and we probably won 1 or 2 contracts. So this has been the effect. So this is what I'm saying. There's something there that we all need to understand better, including ourselves on that. So basically, the focus then has to be the country and the good knowledge of the local scene, and select the places where we would like to work in those places and those countries where we are known, because we have references, because we have lived there, or because we have an official representative in that particular country that represents the company and work with us or work for us, or we have an office in the country. These, for me, would be the places where we need to focus in situations like that, because the local scene is much more important for all that. Another point is to insist on electronic submissions, and this hasn't been the case, and this is a very practical, one can say minor thing, but it's not minor, because I can give you examples, at least certainly from the US, but I'm sure the same thing from Brussels or from Germany. FedEx or DHL would guarantee delivery on between 10 and 12 days. And if you have 3 weeks or 4 weeks to produce and make a submission, this takes absolutely almost 30%, if not half of the time. So e-submissions are extremely important. I think this is something that we would give a feedback also to these institutions to make sure that this is implemented. Now, to mitigate all that, the World Bank issued several activities that you will see in this part when you read this part of the PowerPoint. And could that mitigate the effects? Particularly, as I mentioned, my hunch is a lot of direct contracting. And the difficulty is also with that direct contracting, because to get to the health sector, you then have the Minister of Health, but you also have the managing directors or CEOs of the hospitals that need to get involved, because they know what the immediate needs are and what are the problems that they face. What do? Then they contact and ask the procurement officer of the hospital and the procurement team to get involved. These procurement officers and procurement teams have their own suppliers. They are locally represented or not. Then you have the project implementation unit. They also have their suppliers, and they have contacts, or they were contacted. And then you have the ministries of health and the Ministry of Finance that want to make sure that all that is taking place correctly. But you can see the problem when all these things have to move very fast. I'm just giving that as an example, really. And you will see here what the World Bank was trying to do. So have feedback loops, bi-weekly defined principles for selection of companies, and have mechanisms to proactively respond and solve problems. So among the I think actions that I would suggest, and just to summarize, one is that I think multilateral development banks will become even more active than they are right now. And special attention need for that to be given by everyone involved in the boards of this institution, to make sure that all these things move correctly and with the minimum possible minimum possible problems and corruption. The part of that will be that with the economic situation, I think, evolving and the way economic situation is in many countries in the industrialized world, as well as in the developing countries. On the industrialized world, we will see, I think, activity from companies that are already working with developing countries, that they will most probably maintain their activities as we saw it so far, but also wanting to increase their activities working with those banks because their own programs by the banks will be increasing. Bilateral assistance will continue, of course, as I said, but I think we will see more activities from the multilateral development banks. The choice of the options under COVID and for the months ahead, we have to be much more careful than what we used to do before COVID. And again, I would repeat myself, choosing countries that we know very well. We have been there, we have references, we know the local scene, and we know people in the different ministries that are involved even better in the different areas in the sector that we are involved on that. 3, the general procurement and the projects funded by those multilateral development banks will continue, and will continue like the previous before COVID situation, with the longer periods of preparation of the projects, although that will be reduced because now we have examples how to do that under emergency. So I think we will have an impact on the processing time. Just to give you an indication, I mean, COVID projects were produced, approved in 2 months, compared to 11 to 24 months for the pre-COVID period for projects to be prepared and approved by this institution. So you can see so I think there will be a learning process on how to do things much faster for that. So the choice of the activities and the choice of the options are going to be important. Current work will continue, and it will be in all sectors. So I think we will see a lot of activity by the multilateral development banks in the next several weeks, months, and perhaps 2 years. Among the things that I believe it will be important, and I'm saying much more to incite people that are participating today and from the organizations or really authorities, I think it will be important very soon to ask organizations like the World Bank, and certainly the other banks too, to have a review of the procurement. What happened in the last 6 months? How much was direct contracting? How did it go? Are there complaints? Were there too many complaints compared to the previous period? A really short professional procurement review like the World Bank Procurement Department can do and does, I think it would be very good, and would be some kind of information guarantee to the private sector to induce them to come in and participate even more. These are just ideas. I would stop here. I probably went longer than I thought to start with on that. And Johan, back to you.
Okay, Spiros. I think there is already a question from the company Televic. So, Dirk, I give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much for this initiative, and thank you for this interesting presentation. In the beginning of your slides, it was clear, and we all know it, that since traveling is stalling now during these COVID times, many projects may come at risk for a good success rate because they cannot give the training, they cannot travel. Are you aware of any online training assessment programs that are directly or indirectly related to the COVID projects or the supply of solutions?
Not directly linked to the COVID projects, but this is part of this virtual activity that I mentioned before. So what we did was to identify local consultants and verify that there were consultants that had the reputation to be accepted by the ministry concerned. And so what we did in several cases was to really then, if they didn't have the possibility, make sure they get it, to go around with tablets or their telephones or whatever they could use in real time. And so we not only will have the Zoom conference calls, but we'll also have a clear view of what was happening on the ground. We did the same thing on the training side with possibilities to do that virtually. Of course, not whole day trainings, but hours trainings at the time. And this has also happened, of course, with all the limitations that one can have. These are the only examples I could give you in answer to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Spiros, I have a question for you. This is Johan from FIT speaking. I think I heard some contradiction in the fact that to the one side you said that a centralized World Bank team is dealing with the purchase of medical equipment and emergency equipment to the one side, and they already have this database of 3,000 companies they're working with. And to the other side, you say that a lot of purchases are done in country, locally, and even on a one-to-one basis. So I hear some contradiction there, and that is the first part of my question. The second part of my question, if so much is purchased on the local level, could the offices of FIT, AWEX, and HUB in those countries play a role and support our companies to get closer to the buying agencies? As you know, there are some of our foreign representatives following here. We have a representative in Abidjan, in Lima, in Cairo, that are all following your presentation here. So what can they do to get our companies in closer contact with all those hospitals and agencies that are, as you say, buying one-on-one?
Johan, let me start with the first part. There is no really, I mean, I can understand what you're saying, but there is no really a real contradiction between the two, because the World Bank offered the service to countries and in many cases combined the purchases of several countries when it was possible to do for the very difficult to get equipment. For example, respirators, which was, I mean, on top of that, I can tell you, because I remember the pricing, respirators were going up from $20,000 per respirator to something like $45,000 per respirator. So the fact that the bank was grouping and centralizing the procurement for different countries, or one country, if they were asked to do so, helped to keep the correct specifications and the price and the correct price for the country. So I think that was an emergency situation. The local level, when I say local, is not procured locally, but there was given this authority to move quickly, of course, because there was a need and there was the emergency situation in the country with the rest of the procurement. So if there was a local representative, for example, of a company that produces masks, and that local representative would go and visit the PIU in the Ministry of Health and say, I can sell you those masks for €2 per mask, the procurement will take place directly there. Of course, the masks will come from abroad, so it was based on the agreement, and that the agreement also for the utilization of the World Bank funds or the African Development Bank funds. So there was no real contradiction. What happened was that we could know more about the first case, which was centralized by the bank because it was much more in the open, than compared to the other cases that were done locally. And this brings me to your second point. Absolutely, as an idea in what you mentioned, in the sense that this is a role, and it will have to be in the next months and probably years, the role that FITA, WEX, and Hub can play locally, and the embassies can play locally, really, to support companies. I mean, imagine if a representative of any of the three agencies would have close contacts with the Ministry of Health in Guyana. I'm just picking up any example. Of course, you get to present the Belgian company that produces masks or any other equipment, and one can get easier contract as opposed to the Belgian company calling that project implementation unit in the Ministry of Health in Guyana from Belgium. So no doubt having local representation, whether it is from the agencies or whether it is from the company, has been extremely helpful. This is why I mentioned that to be more successful under the emergency operations, putting aside the procurement through the World Bank emergency procurement, choose countries that we know very well, that we either have local representatives or have worked there, and that we know the local scene and the people that are involved.
Maybe on the same levels, Piros, is there any sense for our companies to try to contact this centralized procurement desk of the World Bank proactively? Is there any sense? You were telling that many of those people work at home. Will they pick up a phone? Will they react to an email?
Yeah, they will react to emails, and they are. I mean, it has become, Johan. We'll be the first one to say we were always getting companies and visits, and I think Marlene can testify to this with the World Bank, with a number of companies from Belgium that actually we supported and helped, and clients from Belgium, and also thanks to the support of Marlene and the Executive Director's Office of Belgium and the bank, and the embassy actually also in Washington, we were able to help organize these visits. Very important to visit and to talk to the team leaders. But you can't find them right now because they're working at home. And what is happening is that you call the phone number, and this doesn't have any forwarding to any cell phone or to any personal phone. So you leave a message and you basically almost never get a response. They do respond to emails. It takes time. They respond, of course, as usual, when you know more the person than you don't. I would hesitate to say to bombard the procurement department with hundreds of emails, but I think it's a way of doing that business. They have asked actually, and they contacted several companies. They asked for companies to contact them. We were among those, and I think this is what made it that we were able to work actually during that period. So the answer is yes to contact the World Bank. Email better than, of course, phone calls. It doesn't always work. It was easier when they were present in the bank. It is more difficult as they work from home.
So is anyone else?
Hello, this is Agar from Cairo. If I can comment on something that I found very interesting during the presentation is actually the role of the international organizations in some countries like Egypt, and we are talking about the developing countries, and how they already had programs before, like the IMF, and they had some arrangements with Egypt and the World Bank before. They had structural adjustment loans to Egypt, and now the fast track kind of facilities or loans because of the COVID-19 I believe some of them, they already started to serve the previous cause or the previous arrangements or adjustment that they wanted to do in the countries, and not always dedicated to the COVID-19 and health issues. Because in the case of, let's say again, Egypt, if it's already a country that's exporting the some of, if we say, the masks and some of the products related to the COVID-19, why would we give a support to imports while they're already giving aids abroad? And also the monitoring for those funds, I don't see it I see it somehow in a way it was a waste of fast track loans, especially for countries that benefited from the IMF loans and the World Bank loans at the same time. So how do you see the role of the private sector while there are countries that have state-owned companies that they take in hands all those kind of loans to distribute it not in a very transparent way? So where can the private sector position itself? Thank you.
Well, I wish I had the clarity to be able to respond and find a solution to what you're saying. This is a major issue and complication actually that exists, and it is the reality of life. I actually understand very well what you're saying. When I was at the World Bank, I was in charge of the Middle East area of operations, and I used to go to Egypt almost monthly at the time. There are several pockets of funding. You have the support of the IMF, which is as you know, the firefighter of these two institutions. When there is fire, the IMF comes in and tries to keep the fire down. This is very quick funding for a very short period of time, and it is mostly, actually entirely, balance of payments and budgetary support. Then you have the World Bank that is for the longer term. I know the other banks, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, all of them, the European Investment Bank, are basically for longer terms and for longer term development. So they're coming in with support for specific projects or for budget support also, with basically policies that need to be changed. Please keep in mind, and I do say from practice, because every time I would go and we would go to Egypt, there was always, almost every other time, there was a visit from the IMF, and those two organizations coordinate very well the policies and the activities to make sure that policies for the demand side of the economy, which is the IMF role, are not contradicting, and the other way around with the supply side of the economy, which is really the role of the World Bank. So all this is consistent, and the ministries that basically get all these priorities are the ministries of finance or international cooperation in case of Egypt, and therefore there is a coordination of what comes in and what goes to where in terms of the different sectors. Then this is a regular program, and I think we will see this regular program continuing in Egypt and in other countries for the years to come, and most probably even enhanced because of the economic situation and difficulties the countries will face in the next couple of years or perhaps longer. Then comes the emergency COVID situation, or any other emergency. Can be a tsunami, can be an earthquake, God forbid, but also now the COVID situation. This funding comes in addition for specific purchases in the health sector, for example. So for that, as those banks work only in the way that if a country is to buy respirators, it will have to be through a specific component of a loan, and that specific component is therefore the emergency health sector loan to Egypt. So that is very specific, and it's going to be the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of International Cooperation that will be involved in the utilization. The private sector role. The private sector role of Egypt, as well as all the other private sectors, we get involved at the second phase, in the sense of when contracts are circulated, distributed, where requests for submissions either for equipment or supplies or works or technical assistance consulting are given out, and therefore we respond to that. And this is where the private sector comes in. There is a competitive selection, which is very transparent in most cases, and then the funding is authorized and then the private sector works. In many countries, before the programs are presented by the countries to those financial institutions, to the multilateral development banks or to the bilateral agencies, they consult the private sector to make sure that the private sector responds. For example, if there is a thinking in the preparation of a project for vocational training of workers in Egypt, to pick up an example, the Ministry of Vocational Training or the Ministry of Education, depending where it is, will consult with the private sector to make sure that what training will be produced, that training responds to the needs of the private sector. So this is the link that takes place. And in many cases, including in Egypt, there were consultations with the private sector for the preparation of the requests for lending that the country was submitting to the World Bank or to the other organization.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Not at all. Johanna, I just wanted to say if there is any other specific, say, question or more detailed discussions on specific cases, I would be happy to, if any company were to contact me, and of course will respond directly to support and give any answers to that.
Yes. In the meantime, we have Jacob Bossel, who has a question for you. Jacob?
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Spiros, for the explanation and the presentation. I have a question. We're a small company. We're a startup company. This year we'll do a turnover about 2.5 million, so rather small. Is that an issue to work with the MDBs? Because we don't have that many how to say that, reference cases, because the contracts we have are €1 million contracts. So that means with 2.5 million, you don't have a lot of clients. Is that an issue? Well, how do I have to see that? Because we have the ambitions to work with the MDBs, but I'm not sure if you're already up to sign off these projects with MDBs because of how big we are.
No, it's a difficult situation, Jacob, because and I think Johan and Hubert and Olivier know generally my answer in these cases. No references in a country or in the region of that particular country, it's a no-go. Chances to be pre-selected or to win the contract without direct references in that particular country are very difficult to get. The selection criteria indicate, and they become actually, as I'm sure you know, for the European Union, they become more and more specific, and for the bank and the other banks the same. They're asking very specific things, and so no references, no go. So the first things we always do is to look at the selection criteria and really check those that we can honestly and 100% cover, and those that we do not cover. And if there is need for references, the way to do it is to associate with another company that will complement the criteria we have and that do have references either in the country or in the region. So here the difficulty is to sell ourselves, in this case your company, to the other group that you're presenting and putting something on the table for that particular project, but it is feasible. 2.5 million, it's a size to really compete. Back of the envelope, 2.5 million, I would go with about 10% of the turnover as contracts to be able to submit tenders for. So you're looking for contracts of 250,000. I suggested in our case, after 20 years in the company, we work with a 7-3-1, 7 selections, 3 pre-selections, and 1 contract. that means that one has to work with 7 or 8 possibilities, very carefully selected, to win one contract. So the cost per preparation is anything between 20,000, 20,000 to 100,000 per preparation of a tender. That includes travel, of course. Now this doesn't happen. Includes travel to the international organization, includes travel to the country. So all that is through virtual means now. So this cost is probably less. But let's assume it's even 15,000. You have to multiply those 20,000 by 7, and then you see that you can aspire to win a contract of 250,000. If you need a partner, that will mean that you share that between the two. The return is not good. So this is where getting associations and going for larger contracts make much more sense. I don't want to discourage. I'm just saying it's complicated. It's a difficult market, but you need to be ready for it. You cannot go walking naked in the woods.
Okay, thanks for the answer.
Spiros, I think what you told now accounts for the ordinary Worldbank projects, but not for the emergency purchases. Huh?
Correct.
I don't want to discourage companies who sell masks or respirators or disinfectants, or tracing apps.
You're right, Johanna. I don't want to discourage at all. You're right. I was responding to a regular situation. I was not. I thought the question was not under COVID, but under COVID, of course, it is different right now.
So I will read out a question that came in through the chat. The question is, as a follow-up of this meeting, is there a way to also discuss with local or regional Worldbank offices to raise specific questions in order to understand more processes and optimize the results? So this is one person wanting to visit an in-country Worldbank office.
Yeah, the answer is yes. If the office is open, many offices are. Sometimes there were decisions in different countries to remove the officials and get them back to their own country or to Washington. In many cases, the offices, many people stayed where they are, and the offices are open. So my answer is yes. As I said before, visiting a country really is very important. So having a discussion with the local authorities, identifying local companies and talking to the local representatives of these banks is important.
Any more questions? So now it is 5:30 exactly, so we can close down now. I want to stress one more time that if you have any follow-up questions on this webinar, then we are always we're always ready to try to answer them. For instance, if you would like to know the specific project the World Bank would have for COVID in a certain country, we at FIT, WEX and Hub know our way on the website of the World Bank to find it very quickly for you. Even the procurement possibilities that are open in the framework of such projects, we can trace them very quickly for you. So please do not hesitate to ask them to us. We have someone more who has a question. It is Kurt de Lodder from the Ministry of Finances. Please, Kurt, I give the floor to you.
Hi, Spiros. Hi, Johan. Hi, everyone. I have a question regarding the development of a potential or possible vaccine for COVID-19. What would be the World Bank's policy response towards some laboratoria who are very close to commercialize a possible vaccine for COVID-19 in the near future?
Spiros, can you provide an answer? I hope you will not be shut down again, providing an answer.
First of all, Kurt, it's very nice to see you and the circumstances also. My goodness, you were here in Washington before, and then we met so many times in Brussels. So, the answer is very, very simple. Unfortunately, Kurt, I don't know. I don't know what the bank will do, because there will be, I mean, first of all, the vaccine, which everybody hopes is going to come quickly, certainly, hopefully by the beginning of next year. And then the WHO is getting involved also on that, which I think is very important for this. But then there will be purchases, and there will be transportation costs. My assumption is that financing institutions will get involved. I'm not sure if any decision has already been made right now. This way, I simply cannot answer that. I think it's an important question to have to contact the health department of the World Bank, and I can certainly find out with our contact and inform Johan and you, Kurt.
Okay, thank you.
Spiros and Kurt, I think I read somewhere that a fund has been created to ensure that if a vaccine is developed, that there would be a just distribution towards developing countries. I thought the United Nations were implicated, but I read this somewhere.
No, I think you're right, Johan. I think it's a WHO. I think there are 170 countries that have already subscribed for that, out of the 190 already in a few days, except the United States, of course, because the administration here said that it will not participate in this activity.
Okay.
But I will find out regarding the vaccine COVID-19 question from Kurt, and I'll get back to you, Johan, for that.
Thank you, Spiros. Thank you, Johan.
Thank all of you for participating. If someone would have still would have an urgent question, you can ask it now. If not, you can contact us later on for a reply. Thank you all. I think we can close down here. Spiros, thank you well for being there. All the people from WEX and Brussels, thank you very much for having supported us to organize this. So thank you all, and until the next time.
Yes, and thank you very much, Johan, and also Hubert and Olivier from the three organizations. Enjoyed very much this discussion, actually, also on my side. Stay all safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Spiros. Thank you, Johan.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.